Restoring a Bing Clockwork Train, and this is part 12, finishing the buffers and a bit of painting. I have two of the original buffer stocks and I'm going to use these, but first of all they need to go into a pot of cellulose thinners or lacquer thinner to remove the paint. This is a tube of cellulose putty and I'm going to use this because there is a dint in the roof. It's only a small dint, but by filling it with cellulose putty and rubbing it down, the roof will look much better when it's painted. I left the roof in the workshop for 24 hours for the putty to harden, and now it's time to rub it down. To rub down the patch of cellulose putty, I'm using 400 grade wet-to-dry sandpaper, and as you can see here, I'm using it wet. Now the patch looks like this and the dint is filled, it's time to give the roof another coat of etch primer, and while the paint's drying, it's time to do something more important. In the last episode, I talked about making a form tool. I've been regrinding the form tool to make this part in one go. This is one of the original buffer stocks from the carriage, after I removed the paint. Once I'd finished grinding the form tool to the correct shape, I also ground a small groove in the top of it. This groove is really close to the edge and it makes it much more free cutting. And why does this make the tool cut better? It's because I've modified the rake angle of the tool. On a lathe tool, the rake angle is important. And the best way to find out about lathe tool rake angles is to type the words lathe tool rake angles into Google. And you will find a lot of really useful information about lathe tool rake angles. By holding the original part against the new part, I can see that I still need to machine a little bit more off the main diameter of the shank. And once again, the calibrated eye that I speak about becomes a very useful accessory. Many years ago, when I was teaching myself how to use a lathe, I used to spend a lot of time just reducing pieces of metal to swarf. And the more that you practice grinding tool angles, taking note of how the tool angle affects the finish, and how much easier it is to actually cut the metal with a very sharp tool ground to the correct angle. And while I'm on this subject, as a general rule, if you're having to put a lot of pressure on the work to cut the metal, then the tool angle is generally wrong. The whole point of me rambling on about tool angles and rake, though, is just to illustrate the fact that if you practice something, you get good at it after a while. I'm not using any measuring equipment in this job at all. I'm just comparing it to the original, and slowly but surely, the part that I'm making starts to strongly resemble the original part. So that's what the calibrated eye is. It's just a case of over the years, plenty of practice doing things like this, and at first it's horrible, then it gets better, and finally you can get it to quite a good standard. You also have to think these jobs through. You will notice what I'm doing now is making another buffer stock further down the bar towards the chuck. I only have to make two of these items. If I needed to make four, I would have pulled the bar further out of the chuck, centre drilled the end of it, and used a live centre, but thankfully I only need to make two of these. I never did like mass production. To make this second part the same as the first, all I had to do was take note of the numbers on the hand wheel when I'd finished the first part. And provided I turn the hand wheel eventually to the same position, the parts will be identical. And thanks to the tool rake that I cut in the tool itself, this is cutting beautifully. The next thing to do is to cut the diameter of the end of the buffer stock. As you can see, the shank of both of the buffer stocks are identical. I forgot to check the hand wheel graduations for this diameter, so I'm checking it from the work, then moving the cutting tool across into the position to cut the diameter on the other part. All I have to do now, once the tool is in position, is wind the cross-slide handle to the same numbers. The next part of the operation is to part off the first of the buffer stocks. And I'm moving the parting tool into such a position that I get the finished dimension automatically. A quick touch with a piece of emery cloth removes the sharp edges, and that's one buffer stock made. When I first centre drilled the part, which I showed earlier, I drilled slightly deeper than I needed to, so I don't need to centre drill it again. I can go straight through with the drill. Now I'm parting off the second buffer stock, and I'm using the first buffer stock to make sure it's the same size. And just like before, a quick touch with some emery cloth gets rid of any sharp edges. When I put the finished buffer head onto the buffer stock, you can see what it's going to look like. In the previous episode, I showed the shaping of the first buffer head in the lathe, and so I repeated that process for the other three. After using my Proxxon motor tool, some emery cloth, followed by some wet dry sandpaper, they look like this. I don't want to polish up the buffer stocks because these are going to be painted. They were originally painted red, the same colour as the engine. It's painting time. The first thing to do is to thoroughly stir the paint. This is a tin of Humbrol satin black paint, and the flatting agent is all in the bottom, so I stirred it thoroughly and I also thinned it. But I accidentally thinned the paint too much, so I wasn't happy with it. So once I'd painted it, I put my brush into reverse and unpainted it. I find watching the unpainting process strangely soothing, but then I am strange to start with. All I did was stir the paint for a longer time until it all mixed together, and now it's fine, as you can see here. And that's about it for this video. I'm going to continue painting and play some soothing painting music until the end. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful.